Tracy stood outside the small, busy drugstore, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. She had been feeling queasy for the past few days, each morning waking up with a swirl of nausea that refused to settle. At first, she tried to shrug it off with a nervous laugh, telling herself it was just her body playing tricks. But today the sick feeling gripped her with an unrelenting force, making her heart skip with the sudden seriousness of the situation. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Tracy pushed open the drugstore door. The familiar jingle of the entrance bell did little to calm her racing thoughts. She wandered down the aisles, her eyes scanning the shelves until they landed on the pregnancy tests. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a box, feeling the weight of the decision it represented. Approaching the counter, Tracy tried to compose herself, but her youthful appearance, which often led strangers to mistake her for someone much younger, didn't help her feel any more confident. Placing the box on the counter, she met the cashier's gaze, which flicked from the pregnancy test back to Tracy's anxious face. "Is this for you?" the cashier asked, her voice laced with a hint of surprise. Tracy's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of red. "Yes, it is," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The cashier's eyebrows arched slightly, and she offered a small smile that Tracy hoped would be followed by an apology for the personal question. Instead, the cashier leaned in a bit, lowering her voice, as if to share a secret. "Are you hoping to be pregnant, or hoping not to be?" The question felt like a punch in the gut. Tracy blinked rapidly, the room spinning slightly as she grabbed the bag with the test. Without another word, she rushed out of the store, the door slamming behind her more forcefully than she intended. Outside, the fresh air felt like a small relief, but her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to talk to her boyfriend, but she didn't know that her boyfriend was thinking completely different things. The moment the pregnancy test showed 2 lines, Tracy's heart seemed to pause in mid-beat. This wasn't from fear or regret, but from a surge of pure excitement. This was the big moment she had been waiting for, and her joy was uncontrollable. Eager to share the news, she quickly texted William, asking him to meet her at their favourite little cafe by the riverside. Sitting across from William, Tracy's hands trembled with anticipation. When he arrived, she could hardly keep the smile off her face. "William, I have something amazing to tell you," she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of nerves and excitement. William looked puzzled but intrigued. "What's going on?" he asked as he took a sip of his coffee, leaning in closer. Tracy took a deep breath and then shared the news, her eyes sparkling. "We're going to have a baby." William's reaction was not what she expected. His face froze, and then his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "What were you thinking, Tracy? Have you lost your mind? We could have continued dating and enjoyed ourselves even more. Didn't you appreciate how everything was perfect between us?" His voice was tinged with frustration and disbelief. Tracy was stunned, her heart sinking. "William, what are you talking about? I thought you'd be happy." He smirked, a cold expression crossing his face. "Unbelievable, why are you so naive? Honestly, you're incredible in bed, but you just don't get life, do you? Did you really think there was something serious between us?" The cafe around them seemed to fade into a blur as Tracy tried to process his words. It felt like waking up from a perfect dream to a nightmare. Was she really so mistaken about their relationship? Desperate for clarity, she reached out across the table, her voice shaky. "William, honey, we're going to be together for the rest of our lives, remember? That's what we talked about, right?" William laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. "Oh my God, Tracy, seriously? Are you this naive? You actually thought I would marry you?" His words sliced through her, each one a brutal strike to her hopes and dreams. Tracy felt as if the world was spinning around her, her dream of a happy future crumbling. William's next move was to grab the pregnancy test from her hand, examining it as if it was some sort of alien artifact. "Is that why you were trying to get pregnant?" he asked, his tone accusatory. As William's harsh words echoed through the small cafe, Tracy could no longer hold back the tears that had been building behind her eyes. A wave of sadness washed over her, and the tears trickled down her cheeks, leaving a damp trail of raw emotion. "I wasn't trying to get pregnant, William. That was never my intention," Tracy pleaded, her voice cracking. "I thought we loved each other." "You ruined everything," William retorted coldly. "You got pregnant. You planned this all along, didn't you? Found a rich guy and thought you could take advantage, huh?" He smirked cruelly, his words slicing through the air. "William, what are you talking about? I wasn't trying to get pregnant. This baby is a blessing," Tracy said, her voice trembling. But she couldn't finish her sentence as William interrupted her. "Well, if God gifted you this baby, then let him take care of it for you." "I'm out," William snapped, his voice filled with disdain. Tracy's world, once filled with happiness and love, began to crumble around her. She couldn't believe the transformation in William. The man she knew with his witty humour and supposed devotion had turned into someone unrecognisable. A heartless monster. As he started to get up, shaking his head in disbelief, he delivered one final blow. "It was really nice knowing you. We could have had more fun, but you chose to ruin everything," William said, standing up to leave. "William, are you breaking up with me?" Tracy asked, her voice a whisper, barely audible over the clamour of the cafe. He raised his hands above his head and exclaimed, "Hallelujah! Finally you understand. It must be tough living with such a limited perspective. Not only am I breaking up with you, but I also want it to be clear that you shouldn't try to find me. Do you understand?" Without waiting for her response, William tossed a few $100 bills on the table. "Here, take this and get rid of the baby. I've got enough things to worry about," he said, his tone dismissive and cruel. Tracy sat alone at the back of the nearly empty cafe, her tears unabated as they streamed down her cheeks. She felt a cold emptiness spreading through her as she tried to process the cruel words William had just spoken. Despite her overwhelming pain, she noticed William hesitating by the door. He turned, gave her a condescending smile, and then leaned in close, his voice dripping with disdain. "Did you really think I would want a child with someone like you?" William asked coldly. Tracy looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Someone like who?" she mumbled, her voice barely audible, but it was enough for William to hear. William's expression hardened as he replied with chilling clarity. "Listen, you represent the masses, the undesirables, the cast-offs. Do you understand now? There are people, and then there are people like you, who have never escaped their circumstances and never will. That's exactly how I see you." With that, William callously tossed a few more bills onto the table, his gesture dismissive and insulting. He then walked briskly out of the cafe, his steps echoing sharply against the floor. Tracy watched him through the window as he made his way to his car, each step driving the reality of their broken relationship deeper into her heart. Sitting there, completely shattered, Tracy tried to comprehend the harshness of William's words. She had never imagined that the man she loved could view her in such a demeaning way. The cruel labels he had thrown at her felt like physical blows, leaving her feeling helpless and alone. As the cafe began to empty and the night grew darker, Tracy sat motionless, her mind replaying the painful confrontation over and over. She realized that she was at a crossroads, needing to decide how to rebuild her life and provide for her unborn child, despite the heartbreak and betrayal she had just experienced. Tears blurred Tracy's vision as she stared at the bills scattered across the table. A few $100 bills lay crumpled on the floor, discarded carelessly. As she looked at them, a stark realization hit her. William was not the man she thought he was. The truth of his coldness and cruelty lay bare before her, symbolized by the scattered money, a painful reminder of his harsh departure. That evening, a deep longing stirred in Tracy's heart. She yearned to return to her hometown, to the warmth and familiarity of her family's dinner table. It hadn't been long since she last sat there, laughing and sharing stories with her younger siblings and parents. The memories of those simple, happy times contrasted sharply with the cold, lonely reality of the cafe. "Oh, how much I want to be with them," Tracy whispered to herself, a tear slipping down her cheek. Yet she hesitated, weighed down by a heavy heart. She felt that going back now, in her current situation, would be too hard. She worried that her family wouldn't understand her, that they wouldn't accept her with all the complications that now clouded her life. As she sat alone, the cafe nearly empty now, Tracy's thoughts drifted to her family. She imagined their reactions, especially her dad's, the questions they would ask, and the disappointment they might feel. Tracy spent her childhood in a modest trailer park with her parents and two younger brothers, Tommy and Alex. From an early age, Tracy shouldered more responsibilities than most children her age, taking care of the household and looking after her brothers whenever her parents were away at work. Her day began early and ended late. She would start with preparing breakfast for Tommy and Alex, ensuring they were ready and fed before school. After sending them off, she would tidy up their small home, often humming to herself, a habit she picked up from her mother. "Make sure you both have your homework and lunches," Tracy called out one morning, checking their backpacks as they prepared to leave. Tommy, ever mischievous, grinned. "Got it, sis! You're like Mom number 2. Alex, quieter and more thoughtful, hugged her. "Thanks, Tracy." As the day progressed, Tracy would often help her neighbours with various tasks, embodying the same spirit of community her mother, Olivia, was known for. Olivia worked as a dedicated nurse at the local hospital. Despite her exhausting schedule, particularly the night shifts, she never let it diminish her warmth and affection, both at work and within the trailer park. One evening, as Tracy returned from running an errand for an elderly neighbour, she found her mother at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee before her night shift. "Mum, do you ever get tired?" Tracy asked, pouring herself a glass of water. Olivia smiled, her eyes reflecting a mix of fatigue and determination. "Of course, honey, but helping people, making sure they're okay, it gives me energy. It's important, you know?" Tracy nodded, understanding more than a child her age might be expected to. "I know. You make things better for everyone. Mrs. Jensen told me you're an angel in scrubs." Laughing softly, Olivia reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Tracy's ear. "I just do what I can, and I see you doing the same, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." As night fell, and Olivia left for her shift, Tracy watched her mother walk away, her nurse's uniform crisp and her stride purposeful. The residents of the trailer park, especially the older ones, cherished Olivia deeply. She frequently checked on them, ensuring they were well and had everything they needed. Her selflessness was not lost on Tracy, who admired her mother not just for her dedication to her work, but for the love she spread so effortlessly. It was this example that shaped Tracy, guiding her as she grew, her heart and actions deeply intertwined with the community that loved her family so dearly. Tracy had always admired how her mother cared for others. She often joined her on neighbourhood visits, seeing firsthand the impact of kindness and support. Their home was a warm place, filled with an air of compassion that extended to everyone in their community. One chilly evening, as shadows stretched and the night settled in, Tracy was reading in her room when a sudden knock startled her. It was unusual for visitors to come so late, especially when her mother was working a night shift at the hospital. She hurried to the door and opened it to find Mr. Lee, an elderly neighbour from the nearby trailer park. His face was etched with concern. "Hey, Tracy, is your mum here?" Mr. Lee asked, peering anxiously into the house. "No, Mr. Lee. She's working the night shift today. What can I do for you, sir?" Tracy replied, her voice calm and inviting. "Oh, Amy is not feeling well again. I told her I would bring Olivia." Mr. Lee looked disappointed, his shoulders drooping as he turned to leave. Despite her youth, Tracy was quick to react. Her mother had taught her the importance of stepping up when others were in need. She ran after Mr. Lee and gently caught his arm, stopping him. "Mr. Lee, Mum won't be home for a while. Can I help instead?" she asked, her eyes earnest. Mr. Lee chuckled softly, a mix of surprise and skepticism crossing his face. "Sweetheart, are you sure you're not afraid of using a needle?" Tracy smiled confidently. "Mum taught me how to do it, and I've practiced on a tomato many times," she assured him. Mr. Lee cleared his throat and smiled, reassured by her determination. "All right then. You know how much I love Mrs. Lee, right?" "Don't worry, Mr. Lee. Everything's going to be all right," Tracy said, her voice filled with a resolve that belied her age. With that, Tracy took Mr. Lee's hand and walked with him back to his home. As they entered, she could see Mrs. Lee resting uncomfortably on the couch. Tracy remembered all the times she had watched her mother in similar situations, and she felt ready. She approached Mrs. Lee gently, asking where she felt pain and listening intently. Tracy then carefully prepared the medication, just as her mother had taught her. She administered the injection with a steady hand, all the while chatting softly to Mrs. Lee to keep her calm. After ensuring that Mrs. Lee was comfortable and her symptoms were easing, Tracy sat with Mr. Lee, who kept thanking her, his eyes glistening with gratitude. As Tracy walked home later that night under the starry sky, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had made a difference, just like her mother. She knew this was just the beginning of many such nights, where she would lend a hand and offer comfort to those around her. Tracy's act of kindness that night not only brought comfort to her ailing neighbour, but also ignited a sense of pride and recognition within her community. Her natural flair for caregiving shone brightly, catching the eyes of those around her. The next morning, as the sun rose casting a golden hue over the trailer park, Tracy's mother returned home weary from her night shift. As she approached their trailer, she noticed Mr. Lee waiting outside. In his hands he held a bouquet of vibrant flowers, their colours vivid against the morning light. The sight was unusual, yet heartwarming. "Good morning, Mr. Lee. What brings you here so early?" Tracy's mother greeted him, her tired eyes brightening at the sight of the flowers. Mr. Lee stepped forward, extending the bouquet towards her. "These are for Tracy. You're raising a kind-hearted young woman, just like yourself," he said warmly, his voice laden with gratitude. Tracy's mother accepted the flowers, her eyes misting over with emotion. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Lee. Tracy told me about last night. I'm so proud of her." Mr. Lee nodded, his face creasing into a smile. She was incredible, helped Amy just like a professional. It's clear she's following in your footsteps. From that day forward, Tracy's reputation as a compassionate and capable helper grew. The older residents of the trailer park, many of whom could not afford regular hospital visits, began to rely on her for assistance. Under her mother's watchful guidance, Tracy learned more about various medical procedures. Each lesson not only sharpened her skills, but also deepened her resolve to make a difference. Her interactions with the residents and the medical tasks she performed with growing confidence strengthened the bonds within the community. Tracy became a symbol of hope and reliability, a young beacon of support for those in need. Amidst her increasing responsibilities and the gratitude of her neighbours, Tracy found a budding passion for medicine. The challenges and the rewards of helping others fueled her desire to pursue this path further. She dreamed of attending college, envisioning herself in a white coat, armed with knowledge and skills to make an even greater impact. Tracy's father, Joe, was a hard-working plumber who often returned home bearing the heavy weight of the day. Though his evenings frequently ended with him slipping into an alcohol-induced slumber, his presence was a constant, albeit quiet, part of their family life. He was a gentleman, never aggressive or hostile, even on the toughest days. On the better days, when the burden seemed lighter, Joe would come home with a smile. Those evenings were rare treasures for Tracy and her siblings. He would tousle their hair, chase them around the living room, and laugh as they shrieked with delight, scattering toys in their wake. But these moments were fleeting, as he would soon nod off, exhausted, leaving the echoes of laughter hanging in the air. Most nights, however, were quieter. Joe would come through the door, his eyes tired and distant, and without saying much, he'd retire to the corner of the couch and fall asleep. The sounds of his deep, steady breathing would fill the room as Tracy and her mother carried on with their evening routines. The family's move to the trailer park had been a harsh blow to Joe. They had lost their previous home due to unpaid taxes, an event that had shaken him deeply. Embarrassment and a sense of failure plagued him, and he turned to alcohol to dull the ache of his disappointments. It wasn't a drinking problem in the usual sense, but a struggle to cope with a life that hadn't turned out as he'd hoped. Despite these challenges, Tracy's love for her father never wavered. She understood his pain, even if she couldn't feel it herself. She cherished the moments when he was sober and lucid, which were as enlightening as they were rare. During these times, Joe would talk to Tracy about the complexities of life, weaving tales that danced between good and evil, right and wrong. "Life's like a big old plumbing system, Tracy," he'd say with a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Sometimes it's all flowing smooth and then, out of nowhere, it gets clogged. It's not just about unclogging it, but understanding why it got blocked in the first place." From these conversations, Tracy learned invaluable lessons. Her father's stories, though simple, were deep reservoirs of wisdom, helping her understand the world in shades rather than in black and white. These lessons shaped her character, teaching her the virtues of patience, resilience, and understanding, traits she embodied daily. The morning of Tracy's departure for college dawned bright and clear, the sun casting a warm glow over the trailer park. It was a day of mixed emotions, pride, excitement, and a touch of sorrow, as the entire community gathered to bid farewell to one of their own. Tracy's parents, Olivia and Joe, stood beside her, an envelope of cash in their hands. They had scrimped and saved every possible penny from Joe's plumbing jobs and Olivia's shifts at the hospital, wanting to contribute to their daughter's future. But as they offered the envelope to Tracy, she gently pushed it back towards them. "Mum, Dad, please keep this. I'll find a part-time job. I want to do this on my own," Tracy said firmly, her voice laced with determination, yet softened by the love and respect she held for her parents. Before her parents could respond, Mr. and Mrs. Lee stepped forward from the crowd. The elderly couple, who had become like second grandparents to Tracy, held another envelope in their hands. "Tracy, you have been a blessing to all of us here," Mr. Lee began, his voice thick with emotion. "Your kindness and dedication to helping others have touched our hearts. We've come together and collected some money to help with your college expenses. You've given so much to our community, and now it's our turn to give back to you. We believe in you, and we know you'll make us all proud." Mrs. Lee, with a gentle smile, extended the envelope to Tracy, which was significantly thicker than the one her parents had offered. It was filled with contributions from the residents of the trailer park, each donation a symbol of gratitude and support for the young woman who had touched their lives. Overwhelmed, Tracy felt tears prick her eyes as she took the envelope. She looked around at the familiar faces, neighbours who had become her extended family, each of whom had played a part in raising and shaping her. The sense of community and collective pride was palpable in the air. "Thank you so much," Tracy managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. "This means the world to me. You've all taught me so much about kindness and perseverance. Thank you." She then turned to her parents, her eyes brimming with tears but her smile unwavering. "Mum, Dad, thank you guys so much. You raised me to be the person I am today. I promise I won't let any of you down." Joe and Olivia, deeply moved by the community's generosity and their daughter's maturity, couldn't hold back their tears. They embraced Tracy tightly, knowing their little girl was ready to take on the world, one she was well equipped to make a better place. As Tracy climbed into the car, she took one last look at the trailer park that had been her home, her school of life. With a heart full of dreams and a community's support behind her, she was set on her path to success, ready to embrace the new adventures that awaited her in college. As Tracy settled into her college life, the initial excitement was quickly tempered by the reality of her financial situation. She was frugal, rarely spending on anything beyond the absolute necessities. Her main indulgence was books, which were essential for her studies but costly. After covering her dorm room expenses, whatever money she had left went straight to textbooks. Aware of the financial constraints her family faced back home, Tracy was determined to find a way to support herself. She needed a job that was flexible enough to accommodate her academic schedule. The local diners, while hiring, required an 8-hour daily commitment, something impossible for her to manage. Frustrated, but not defeated, Tracy picked up a local newspaper in search of any job that might suit her needs. It was in these classifieds that she stumbled upon an ad for a cleaning service looking specifically for college students. They offered flexible scheduling, promising to call only when needed. It was an ideal solution for Tracy. Flexible hours meant she could work without compromising her studies. This job led her to William's house. William, the son of wealthy parents, lived in a world quite different from the trailer park where Tracy had grown up. Initially, their interactions were minimal, with barely a word exchanged. Tracy, focused on her job, didn't expect any social niceties. However, one day, as she was cleaning, William complimented her. It was unexpected. Tracy, not used to receiving praise for her looks, was taken aback. She brushed it off as a casual remark, but William continued to offer compliments over the following weeks. As time passed, their interactions grew into conversations beyond the confines of his home. They began to talk about their interests, their families, and their aspirations. Before long, they were seeing each other outside of work hours, and a few months later, they were officially dating. Tracy, who had always been focused on her studies and helping her family, found herself navigating new emotional territory. She was investing more and more in this relationship, slightly veering off the disciplined path she had always followed. Despite her intelligence and caution, Tracy was somewhat naive when it came to matters of the heart. She viewed William as a kind and genuine partner, completely unaware of his real disposition. William, accustomed to a life of privilege and little consequence, treated relationships as temporary diversions. He was known among his friends as a heartbreaker, a fact Tracy was blissfully unaware of. She did not see the signs of his manipulative behaviour, nor did she realise that she might just be another conquest in his ongoing cycle of whims and disinterest. For weeks after the breakup, Tracy struggled to come to terms with her situation. She didn't want to burden her parents, who were already facing their own financial struggles. She couldn't bear the thought of showing up at their doorstep pregnant, knowing it would only add to their hardships. Feeling alone and unsure of what to do next, Tracy often found herself overwhelmed with worry and fear about the future. Among the biggest discomforts of pregnancy for Tracy were insomnia and headaches. Sometimes she would walk for hours at night trying to calm herself. This lack of sleep and constant pain also affected her studies, making it hard to concentrate and keep up with her coursework. One evening, Tracy pulled out the crumpled cash that William had thrown at her that day. She had been consumed with the idea of getting an abortion for the past few days. It seemed like an easy solution to all her problems, she thought. That night, she went for a walk outside. Her mind was a battleground. One part of her argued that ending the pregnancy would quickly solve everything, while the other part insisted that the child was a gift from God and deserved a chance at life. Tracy sat on the curb, feeling lost and alone, clutching the money tightly. She had lost track of time and didn't know how long she had been sitting there, lost in her thoughts and emotions. "No, I'm not a monster," she told herself. That innocent soul didn't deserve such cruel treatment. The thought planted a seed of light in her heart. She began to wonder about her future and how she was going to provide for her child. The path ahead seemed daunting, but the idea of giving her baby a chance filled her with a new sense of purpose. After a long walk, Tracy felt tired and sat on a cold curb. It was outside a small grocery store and there weren't many people around. The street was quiet, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Tracy shivered and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. She stared down at her feet, lost in thought. Suddenly, the door of the grocery store jingled. A man in his early 30s walked out, carrying a small bag of groceries. He started to walk away, but then stopped next to Tracy. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked gently. Tracy didn't look up. "Yeah, I'm fine, thanks," she mumbled. The man didn't move. He just stood there quietly. After a moment, Tracy looked up, feeling a bit concerned, but when she saw his face, she recognized him. "Oh, you're Mr. Kramer, right? The new instructor?" she asked, feeling a bit embarrassed. Richard smiled. "That's me. And you're a medical student, right?" Tracy quickly pulled herself together, trying to shake off her embarrassment. "Hi, Mr. Kramer. Yes, that's right. I just felt a bit tired and thought I'd sit down for a bit. But I'm okay. I'm just going to continue on my way," she said. As she quickly got up and took a step, Tracy suddenly felt lightheaded and dizzy. She stumbled and almost fell, but Richard caught her just in time. "Whoa, are you okay?" Richard asked, holding her steady. Tracy's head was spinning. She had been sitting on the curb for so long that she had forgotten how cold it was outside. I'm just a bit dizzy," she said, her voice shaky. Richard looked concerned. "No, this is not going to fly. You definitely need some help. Where do you live?" "At the dorm," Tracy replied weakly. Richard glanced at his watch. "That's quite a way to go. There won't be any more buses until morning," he said, looking around. Then he turned back to Tracy, who was visibly distressed. "When did you last eat?" Tracy tried to remember. "I think it was in the morning," she said. Richard sighed. "Oh man, let's get you something to eat, shall we?" Tracy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Someone was really worried and concerned for her. She stood in the cool breeze, rustling the leaves around her, and stared at Richard. His kind eyes looked back at her with genuine concern. Tracy took a deep breath and tried to explain. "I've just had a series of misfortunes lately," she said, her voice shaking. "Everything is going to be okay for me soon. I just need to hang in there." Richard smiled and nodded, listening quietly. He knew she was having some tough times. When Tracy was done justifying the state she was in, he gently put his hand on her shoulder. "Tracy," Richard said softly, "it's okay to feel overwhelmed. You don't have to go through this alone." Tracy was caught off guard. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Suddenly, tears welled up in her eyes and she couldn't hold them back any longer. She started to cry. Richard placed his arm around her shoulder and pulled her close. "It's all right," he whispered, his voice steady and comforting. "Everything is going to be all right." Tracy buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She had been holding in her emotions for so long, trying to stay strong. But now, with Richard's support, she felt safe to let it all out. "Thank you, Mr. Kramer," she managed to say between sobs. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Richard held her tightly and let her cry. "You're not alone, Tracy." They stood there for a while, the street around them growing quieter. Tracy's tears slowed, and she began to feel a sense of peace. "I'm sorry for breaking down like this," Tracy said, wiping her eyes. "Don't apologize," Richard replied with a gentle smile. "Everyone needs a shoulder to cry on sometimes." Tracy nodded, feeling a warmth in her heart. After a few moments of silence, Richard spoke up. "You know what? This might sound creepy, but you need to come to my place. You're shivering, and you need something hot to drink," he said. Tracy hesitated. "I don't know." Richard held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I promise I'm just trying to help. My place is just around the corner. You'll be safe, and you can warm up and eat something." Tracy was just too exhausted to resist. She looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern. She nodded, slowly. "Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kramer," she said softly. Richard smiled reassuringly. "Great. Come on. It's not far." He led the way and Tracy followed, her steps unsteady. The cold night air seemed to bite even harder now, but knowing she was headed somewhere warm made it a little more bearable. As Tracy stepped into Richard's apartment, she was immediately struck by the sight of a small library. The room was cozy, with shelves filled from floor to ceiling with books. She walked over to the shelves, her fingers brushing over the spines of the books. She noticed titles on medicine, anatomy, and pharmacology. "Wow, Mr. Kramer," Tracy said, her eyes wide with wonder. "You have so many medical books. Do you read all of these?" Richard smiled, pleased by her interest. "Yes, I do. These books are my companions. With them, I forget about loneliness," he said, gesturing to the shelves. Tracy's heart ached at his words. She glanced at Richard, noticing the hint of sadness in his eyes. Before she could say anything, Richard noticed her reaction. "Would you like some hot coffee?" he offered, hoping to lighten the mood. "Yes, please," Tracy replied, trying to push back her own emotions. Richard made his way to the kitchen and soon returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee. They sat down together, and Richard began showing Tracy some of his favourite books. They talked about different diseases and treatments, and Tracy was surprised at how knowledgeable he was. "How do you know so much about medicine?" Tracy asked, genuinely curious. Richard shrugged modestly. "I've always been interested in it. Plus, these books keep me company when I need it the most." Tracy nodded, understanding the comfort books could bring. But the word loneliness echoed in her mind, stirring up her own feelings. She felt tears welling up, but tried to blink them away quickly. Richard noticed the shift in Tracy's demeanour. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tracy, are you okay? Is there something you want to talk about?" he asked softly. Tracy hesitated, her eyes searching Richard's for a moment. Then, unable to hold back any longer, she broke down and began to tell him everything about William. She talked about the relationship, the hopes she had, and the pain of the recent breakup. Richard listened intently, his face full of empathy. He nodded as she spoke, understanding the weight of her words. When Tracy finished, she felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "I'm so sorry you've had to go through this," Richard said gently. "But remember, it's okay to feel this way. It's part of healing." Tracy nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, Mr. Kramer. It means a lot to me that you listened." Richard smiled warmly. "Anytime, Tracy. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." Feeling the warmth from the coffee and the comforting presence of Richard, Tracy realized that despite everything, there were still good people in the world who cared deeply about others. Richard's kind demeanor had given her a much-needed sense of peace. As they chatted, Richard stood up and said, "Let me make you something to eat. You need your strength." He went into the kitchen and soon returned with a delicious sandwich. It was simple, with fresh ingredients that somehow made it just perfect. "Thank you, Mr. Kramer," Tracy said, taking a bite. "This is really good." "Glad you like it," he smiled, and then excused himself to go to his study. Tracy felt comfortable enough to relax on the couch, her attention captured by one of Richard's medical books. It was fascinating, filled with insights and discoveries she had never imagined. After a while, Richard found something interesting about a new medical discovery and eagerly wanted to share it with Tracy. Walking out of the study, he started, "Tracy, you won't believe what they've discovered about—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Tracy peacefully asleep on the couch, the book resting on her chest. A tender smile crossed his face. Quietly, he fetched a light blanket from a nearby chair and gently covered her, ensuring she wouldn't catch a chill. The next morning, the first thing Tracy noticed when she opened her eyes was the soft light filtering through the curtains. It took her a moment to remember where she was, and the weight of the previous days crashed down on her. She sat up abruptly, her heart racing. "Oh God, what have I done?" she whispered to herself, feeling the pang of her heartache afresh. As she sat, trying to collect her thoughts, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted in from the kitchen. Hearing movement, she quickly straightened the sofa and adjusted the blanket Richard had draped over her. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the kitchen. "Good morning," Richard greeted her cheerfully as she entered. "I was just about to wake you. I was afraid the breakfast might get cold. Come on in. Take a seat." "Thanks, I'm not really hungry," Tracy replied, her stomach still in knots from the rush of emotions. "Come on, you need to eat something," Richard insisted gently, his tone both caring and insistent. Tracy couldn't help but feel thankful for his persistence. She nodded and took a seat at the table. Richard served her breakfast, which included fresh fruits and scrambled eggs. As they ate, they engaged in light conversation. It wasn't anything deep or too personal, but just enough to make Tracy feel at ease. "Thank you, Mr. Kramer," she said, feeling a bit stronger. "This means a lot to me." "Any time," Richard replied with a warm smile. "It's good to have company." After they finished their breakfast, Richard stood up and gently suggested to Tracy, "Why don't you go to the living room and relax for a bit? We can head out later." Tracy glanced at the used dishes and said, "Let me help you clean up." "No, you're my guest," Richard insisted with a friendly wave of his hand. "Please, just go and rest." Tracy hesitated but finally nodded and moved to the living room, sinking into the soft cushions of the sofa. Meanwhile, Richard began clearing the table. He stacked the dishes neatly and started washing them, all the while humming a tune under his breath. The melody was soft and cheerful, filling the kitchen with a warm, homely vibe. After finishing the dishes and wiping down the counters, Richard removed his apron and hung it neatly on a hook. With everything in the kitchen in order, he joined Tracy in the living room. He pulled a chair across from where she was sitting and made himself comfortable. Richard looked at Tracy with a serious expression, his eyes kind, yet intent. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began, his voice gentle, "and I might have an offer for you that could help." Tracy looked up, her interest piqued. "An offer? What do you mean?" 20 years had passed. "Hold on, Mr. Miller. The ambulance will be here any minute," his personal assistant reassured him as she glanced anxiously down the road. William winced. the pain evident on his face as he clutched the armrest of his chair. "Should have had that surgery when the doctors recommended," murmured William's neighbour who had come to help. "Now look at the state he's in." Just then, William's personal doctor arrived moments before the ambulance. Seeing William in such distress, he bit back the urge to scold him for not undergoing surgery sooner. Instead, he said softly, "Oh my God, Mr. Miller." William, reading the unsaid words in his doctor's eyes, replied, I know. Let's fix me now. What can we do?" "There's only one doctor who can handle this the best in these situations. She's at KB Clinic. I'm calling her right now," the doctor explained as he pulled out his phone. As William leaned back, his thoughts raced. The idea of his life hinging on the expertise of a woman, whom he had never met, was unsettling. His experiences with his wife had left a deep scar. She had not only attempted to flee with a significant portion of his fortune, but had almost succeeded, if not for the timely intervention of his security staff. Over 3 years of marriage, and he had never suspected her capable of such betrayal. It had completely broken his trust, making him wary and distant. William Miller sat alone in his expansive living room, his gaze lost beyond the window where the sun dipped low, its last light casting long shadows across the floor. The warm glow of the sunset should have been comforting, but it did little to ease the cold loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. He wasn't old, nor was he lacking in wealth, but in his heart, William felt a profound emptiness, a void that had widened ever since he discovered his wife's betrayal. He thought back to the days when his instincts about people seemed sharper, more reliable. Those days now seemed like a distant memory, tainted by the realization that the person he had trusted most had been plotting against him. His wife's actions had not only robbed him of his peace, but had also seeded a deep mistrust towards others, especially women. Could they all be the same? He pondered, a bitter taste in his mouth as he thought about the deceit and manipulation he had experienced. Despite the turmoil within, William maintained a composed exterior. He had always cared about his image, about appearing positive and successful. It was a trait he believed he had inherited from his parents. William's mind wandered to his younger days, a time marked by both carefree joy and sudden tragedy. He had been just out of college when he decided to throw the largest party his town had ever seen. To ensure he had the house to himself, he had gifted his parents a trip to South America. "A small token of my gratitude," he had said during the farewell, hiding his ulterior motive behind a smile. His parents had been thrilled, their faces lighting up at the prospect of adventure. They were not seasoned travellers, but the excitement of exploring the lush jungles of Colombia had been too enticing to pass up. William remembered waving them off, the guilt of his deception buried under the thrill of the upcoming party. Tragically, the adventure turned into a nightmare when his parents partook in a guided tour through the dense tropical forests. The tour, poorly managed and lacking proper oversight, exposed them to hazardous conditions. During a rest stop, they consumed food that had been contaminated, overlooked by the inattentive guides. The toxins acted swiftly, and despite being rushed to a local hospital, their condition worsened. The hospital staff administered the wrong medication due to a critical error. This terrible oversight led to the tragic and untimely death of his parents. Since that fateful day, William has carried a deep-seated fear of hospitals, an overwhelming phobia that has haunted him relentlessly. This phobia shaped much of William's life, guiding his decisions and even his relationships. Avoiding hospitals meant he often neglected his own health, a risk he deemed necessary to maintain his peace of mind. The fear was a shadow that loomed large, colouring his every decision, every hesitation. William's ulcer was discovered quite by chance. He found out about it during a routine medical checkup, a visit he had attended only reluctantly due to his overwhelming fear of hospitals. At first, the ulcer wasn't severe. It caused him mild discomfort, and the doctors suggested surgery as a precautionary measure. However, William's deep-rooted fear of hospitals led him to delay the procedure, ignoring the risks. Now, as he anxiously awaited the arrival of an ambulance, William paced back and forth in his living room. He wondered if he would ever see the familiar comforts of his room again. His fear of hospitals had only intensified over time, making the thought of returning for surgery almost unbearable. "Will the surgery go well?" he murmured to himself, his voice shaky. "What if they make a mistake like they did with my parents?" These questions haunted him as he waited, each minute stretching longer than the last, his heart thudding with fear and uncertainty. Unbeknownst to William, facing his fears this time would change his life in unimaginable ways. By the time William arrived at the hospital, he was barely conscious. His condition had worsened significantly, adding urgency to his situation. He was immediately rushed into the operating room. Inside, a team of skilled surgeons and nurses sprang into action, preparing for the procedure. William's personal doctor, Dr. Simmons, was also there. She had been with William through his medical journey and knew his history well. "Make sure everyone is informed of his phobia and past complications," Dr. Simmons instructed the team calmly. "We need to handle this with extra care." William, drifting in and out of consciousness, could hear snippets of conversations around him. As William gradually regained consciousness, he felt an overwhelming urge to pray. However, not knowing how to properly offer a prayer, he simply gazed around the room instead. His vision was still blurry, making it difficult to discern any details. All he could see were white, shadowy figures moving around him, their forms blending into the sterile background of the hospital room. These figures were the medical staff, and William's life now depended on them. Even though he couldn't see them clearly, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for their expertise and care. In his own way, he offered a silent, heartfelt expression of thanks, hoping that his ordeal would soon come to a positive end. At one point, the entire medical team gathered around the table where William lay. He felt the gentle prick of a needle entering his arm, followed by the soft placement of a mask over his face. As the anesthesia began to take effect, a doctor leaned over him. William squinted, trying to focus. He realized this must be the skilled surgeon everyone had praised. Looking into her eyes, a sudden flash of recognition hit him. Despite the haze clouding his mind, he knew those eyes all too well. Gathering the last bit of his strength, he whispered her name just before the world went dark. "Tracy." At the sound of her name, Tracy's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She stepped back slightly from the operating table and quickly picked up William's medical chart to confirm her suspicions. Until that moment, she hadn't known William's last name. But now, seeing it written on the chart, everything clicked into place. Her eyes widened as she read his name again, recognizing him as someone from her past. This unexpected revelation added a new layer of emotion and responsibility to the procedure she was about to perform. After the surgery, Tracy stood outside the hospital, the weight of her actions heavier than the surgical tools she had wielded. She took a long drag from the cigarette, a rare indulgence she allowed herself in moments of severe stress. Her colleague, standing a respectful distance away, watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when Tracy Graham, one of the best surgeons in our hospital, would operate on someone she hated," he said, breaking the silence. Tracy exhaled slowly, the smoke mingling with the chilly air. "It's a strange world," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "That man on the operating table, he's not just someone I despise. He's someone who hurt me deeply." Her colleague nodded, understanding the conflict, yet not fully grasping the depth of it. Why put yourself through this? Tracy looked away, her gaze lost in the distance. Because it's my duty, she explained. As a doctor, I took an oath to treat the ill to the best of my ability, regardless of who they are. It's not just about medical ethics. It's about being human. That's incredibly brave of you, her colleague remarked, genuinely impressed. It doesn't feel brave, Tracy confessed. Her colleague offered a sympathetic smile, his own cigarette forgotten. I can't imagine how hard that must be, but I think you did the right thing. Tracy nodded, stubbing out her cigarette under her shoe. Maybe, but it doesn't change the past. It doesn't change what he did. All I can hope is that today I've changed something, even if it's just a small part of the narrative. Tracy felt thankful for her colleague's kindness as he left, letting her think alone. Suddenly she remembered the time when Richard, now her husband, had proposed to her. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they offer significant scholarships for participants who are married and have children. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm offering you a chance to marry me. You'll give birth, we'll name the child, and I promise I won't hurt you. You'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. The program lasts 3 years. Once we return, it'll be up to you to decide whether to stay married to me or go back to your previous life. When Richard finished making his unusual proposal, Tracy was caught off guard. She had anticipated many things, but never an offer like this. Sensing her hesitation, Richard told her that she could take a week to think it over. During that time, they could also get to know each other better, which might help her make a more informed decision. Over the course of a few weeks, Richard and Tracy spent a significant amount of time together. They went on long walks during which they shared stories, experiences, and aspirations, allowing them to form a deeper understanding of each other. Tracy found herself increasingly intrigued by Richard's personality and ideas, and she started to seriously consider his proposal. Tracy found herself questioning why Richard, a handsome and successful man, had chosen her for this proposal. After all, she was a pregnant student on the verge of failing her studies. She couldn't help but wonder why he didn't already have a significant person in his life, someone he could rely on for such an important decision. As they spent more time together, she couldn't shake the feeling that there must be some hidden reason behind his choice. The mystery only added to the complexity of her decision-making process, as she weighed the potential risks and rewards of entering into this unconventional arrangement. Meanwhile, Richard was focused on one thing: receiving Tracy's affirmative answer to his proposal. In reality, Richard's participation in the prestigious medical program had already been secured, and his marital status was not a determining factor. He had been selected for the program based on his skills and qualifications alone. The idea of marrying Tracy was not a requirement as Tracy thought in the beginning, but rather something very personal to Richard that he would reveal later on. Tracy ultimately agreed to Richard's proposal, and they entered into what Tracy thought of as marriage of convenience to embark on the medical program together. However, over the course of that year, their relationship deepened and evolved, turning their marriage into something genuine and meaningful. They became true husband and wife, not just in name but also in spirit, as they supported each other through the challenges and triumphs of the program. Throughout their journey, Tracy never once regretted her decision, as she realized that it had brought her not only personal and professional growth, but also a loving and fulfilling partnership with Richard. 5 years later, Tracy and Richard welcomed a baby girl into their family. The arrival of their daughter had a profound impact on Tracy's son, who instantly felt a sense of responsibility for his little sister. He embraced the role of an older brother, doing his best to protect and care for her. Now, years later, Tracy did her best to avoid the hospital ward where William was recovering from his surgery. She felt conflicted, given their past and her feelings towards him. However, William was insistent on seeing the doctor who had saved his life, unaware that it was Tracy who had performed the operation. Reluctantly, Tracy agreed to visit William, knowing that it was her professional duty to ensure his well-being and recovery. She prepared herself to face him, aware that their reunion could bring up a myriad of emotions and unresolved issues. "Did you want to see me? I'm all ears, sir," Tracy said, trying to maintain a professional demeanour. "Tracy, are you going to keep running around and pretend we don't know each other?" William smiled and attempted to grab her hand. She deftly swerved away and asked, "If you don't have any more questions, then I should get going." "Come on now, why are you acting like a little girl? Do you still hold on to those old memories? Things have changed, and we've changed too. Are you still single, by the way?" Tracy looked at him in surprise. He wasn't joking at all. He genuinely believed that Tracy might still be interested in him. She smiled and replied, "I'm sorry, sir, but I think that's none of your business." With that, she turned around and walked towards the door, leaving William to reflect on their encounter and the passage of time. As Tracy was about to leave the room, William managed to sit up in his bed, determination in his eyes. "Tracy, don't forget that I always get what I want," he declared, hinting at his persistent nature. Tracy couldn't help but feel a mix of irritation and amusement at his audacity. It seemed that, despite the years and their personal growth, William still clung to his old ways. Shaking her head, she exited the room, leaving him to ponder his own words and the reality of their situation. Every day, fresh flowers appeared on Tracy's desk, clearly sent by William in an attempt to win her over. And every day she dutifully carried them out to the reception area, where she left them for the nurses to enjoy. The envious glances from the nursing staff did not go unnoticed by Tracy, but she remained steadfast in her decision to keep her distance from William. Despite his persistence, William found it increasingly difficult to get a hold of Tracy for a meaningful conversation. She was careful to avoid any unnecessary interaction with him, maintaining her professional boundaries and focusing on her duties as a doctor. One day, William was granted permission to walk around the hospital, and he decided to seize the opportunity to catch Tracy outside. He didn't bother trying to learn more about her current life. He stood outside, observing birds as they fought over a piece of bun and chirped loudly. The scene reminded him of the way people fought over things, but he couldn't finish watching, as the birds were suddenly scared away by a white Mercedes pulling up to the front doors. A minute later, Tracy emerged from the hospital. William saw this as his chance to finally have a conversation with her outside the confines of the hospital ward. He gathered his courage and prepared to approach her, hoping to rekindle the connection they once had. "Tracy," William called out, drawing her attention. "What do you need, William?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I just need to talk to you. Can I have some of your time?" Tracy glanced at her watch and said, "You have 2 minutes." "You've become cold-hearted. Listen, Tracy, when I saw you, I realized that nothing has changed. I still love you. I think we need to try again," William said. Tracy burst out laughing. "What about my opinion? Are you interested in hearing what I have to say?" William looked surprised. "I thought you loved me so much. Remember those times, Tracy? William, please leave me alone. I truly hoped I would never see you again." Tracy attempted to walk away, but William grabbed her hand. "You don't understand what you're walking away from," he insisted. At that precise moment, the door of the white Mercedes opened, and a young man stepped out. As William caught sight of him, he froze in his tracks and, in surprise, let go of Tracy's hand. The handsome young man standing before him was the spitting image of William himself, albeit much younger. William couldn't believe his eyes, while Tracy simply looked on, her expression revealing a mix of amusement and relief. It was evident that there was a connection between the young man and Tracy, and William's assumptions about their relationship were now being challenged by this unexpected development. "Any problems, Mum?" the young man asked Tracy. "No, honey, everything is all right. This man felt unwell, but I think he's better now. So shall we go?" "Yes, let's go. Dad and Jenny are waiting at the restaurant." William slowly sat down on the stairs, feeling defeated. He realised that any further attempts to win Tracy back would be futile. The young man opened the car door for his mother and then returned to William. He studied William's features for a moment, seemingly intrigued by their striking resemblance. A wave of hope washed over William as he wondered if the young man would question their similarities. William mentally prepared himself to confess everything, anticipating that this unexpected encounter could potentially lead to a connection with someone he never knew existed. "Mr. Miller, I have a curious personality and I tend to question things around me. I've known you for a long time and I know who you really are to me. I'd like to ask you for one favour. Please stay away from our family. If you don't, I'm going to have to stop you." "Good luck," the young man declared, surprising William with his directness. The car drove away, leaving William to his thoughts. He sat there for a long time, reflecting on his life and the choices he had made. Here he was, a man whose happiness was measured in pockets full of money and a deep-seated hatred towards someone who wasn't supposed to exist, simply because that's what William had decided. He couldn't help but wonder how things could have been different if he had made different choices in the past. Perhaps he wouldn't be sitting alone on these steps, having heard to stay away from his own son. Perhaps he would have found true happiness and fulfillment in life, instead of the empty satisfaction that came from material possessions and power. As he stood up and dusted himself off, William looked at the horizon and a deep sense of loneliness settled in his heart. He knew that this was how he was being paid back for his cruelty in the past. It was a strange feeling for him, as it was the first when he truly regretted his actions and realised he had grown up. He walked up the stairs back to the hospital and disappeared in the hallway.